This is Johnny Dosco. Stay tuned for another Scoresheet podcast. Holy Kadelka!
Hello, and welcome to another Scoresheet podcast. Happy to say we have back with us Nick Minnix. He's a baseball writer for KFFL.com. How are you today, Nick?
I am super. How are you?
I am doing well. It's it's kind of fun when March comes along. You got spring trainings going. They even have the WBC going strong this year, though I must admit I'm not an avid follower of that particular thing. But, it's an exciting time of year for baseball fans.
It is, and I am not an avid follower of WBC either.
Well, I mean, if you really concentrate on fantasy, maybe the main thing to get out of that is to hope that no pitcher you've already got on your team gets hurt trying to pitch in a, early spring training game that actually means something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much the only thing I'm looking for from that. I kind of view it as it's a kind of a parade to me. It's not really of much interest. I hope no one gets hurt in the process, though.
Yeah, that'd be my thing. And one word of warning to people, if you see some little blurb that says so-and-so hit 3 home runs against the Dutch team or something, I would highly recommend taking those numbers with a grain of salt, because some of the pitching in the WBC is going to be pretty much on a level with me pitching.
Yes, or that's you have a lot of cases of high A ballers and double A ballers who get their first spring invites. It's pretty much the same thing, I think.
Yeah, well, the same thing was true, I think, with all spring training numbers. It's one thing to read an article that says Ryan Howard is looking really injury-free this year and his swing looks great, but to actually care what numbers he has, especially this early in spring training, seems a little ridiculous, because he's probably taken half his at-bats against a guy he's never going to see in the majors.
Yeah, I think that's a good bit of that's true. When you run into a player who's this is actually a topic we're just talking about with some of the guys I work with, was that Baseball Reference has just come up with a really cool new column in their spring training stats that they deliver, where they kind of rate the quality of the opponent that players have been facing and give you kind of an average. And so I think that that's kind of, obviously, it's not going to be the be-all, end-all of the quality of the opponents, but it gives you an idea or some greater context to the quality of the numbers. And so when you see a guy who's hitting 462 and has 7 home runs, but you see he's faced like a certain level of opponent, and the majority of them are kind of double-A type players, you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't put so much stock in those numbers. And I think that that's just, it's a nice addition to be able to kind of judge some of those numbers. And the biggest thing I look for in numbers like that are, in general, the strikeout to walk ratio. I mean, obviously, if those numbers are not really that good against the quality opponents down there, there's probably a potential issue there. And I think that kind of taking a cue from Ron Chandler and his Baseball HQ work, is that some trends that they've noticed over the past 2 decades, or that just that players who are having phenomenal springs as far as their slugging percentage goes, if they're really hitting a lot of extra base hits, I think it's a pretty good indicator that there's a potential kind of breakout coming. It's at least worth watching, but to take into account the quality of opponent, I think is a little bit of a bonus. It kind of help you weed through some of those.
Well, and yeah, I think I did read that same thing from Chandler, I guess it was, that said especially for the young guys, some 24-year-old, and suddenly in the first 2 weeks of spring training he's actually getting doubles, triples, homers, that maybe that's a number you want to pay attention to. But it's also a very small sample size. I read an article yesterday, and one of the sites was talking about some guy had gone 4 for 9, and if he keeps that up, he'll be great. I'm thinking 9 at-bats. That's 2 games. And if he does it in July, you don't even notice what he does in 9 straight at-bats.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, obviously, we're going to be talking about a small sample size regardless, because it's spring training. This is actually something we're talking about on an article in KFFL2, is just what kind of things do you pay attention to in spring training? Because in general, we all kind of accept this maxim that spring training stats are meaningless. So what is it that you really look for? The things that I look for are, I want to see steady progression as far as players' health goes. I want to see basically evidence that a player is as healthy or as unhealthy as my theory about him might be. I basically want to see some evidence to support kind of theories about him based on and how they're going to affect our projections. And that's kind of the number one thing for me, is health. And then again, it's just indicator stats like strikeout to walk ratio and things like that, or more so those individual categories and contact rate and things like that. Because in the end, a lot of these other things even out. But I want to see it over 60 to 80 at bats as opposed to, like you said, 9.
Yeah, nine's not much. Well, you're right. Health is the thing. If it's a guy that's a veteran, like say Ryan Howard, then what you're really concerned with, because of the health issues he's had the last 2-3 years, is not how many home runs he hits in spring training probably, but is he managing to play every day? It'd be a bad sign if he plays one day and then has to take 2 days off.
Yeah, absolutely. Howard is a perfect example of a guy that, I think is going to be undervalued kind of around the community. I have yet to see a really high endorsement of a rebound from him. And I can understand having some skepticism about it. Obviously, he's had a lot of struggles hitting left-handers. His contact rate is pretty god-awful, just in general throughout his career. I think a lot of folks are kind of taking 2012 was almost like a data point as far as a trend goes in his performance. And to me, his performance last season was almost completely related to health, lack of health, because of obviously the torn Achilles that he suffered at the end of the postseason in 2011. So to me, he's an excellent rebound candidate. I've examined his numbers quite a bit as far as number of things related to his contact rate, his strikeout rate. I give him a lot of credit for his indicating stats in a lot of other columns. Go up quite a bit actually with runners on base, runners in scoring position, things like that. In general, that they all do for a lot of players, but his go up quite a bit, I think, more than normal. That's the reason he's always been a great run producer, even though he doesn't always provide a great batting average. Everything this spring so far, he's played in each of their first 12 games. He says he doesn't want to take a day off. He wants to get ready for that type of season. So I think that a lot of this just bodes well for his outlook. He's performed really well against left-handers. Obviously, not the greatest left-handers. You're talking like Brett Cecil was the latest guy he victimized. But bottom line is, I think that he's showing progress there, and in general, it's just proof to me that he's healthy. And I think that at minimum, he's kind of a mixed league, mid-range to low-end first baseman that I think can provide those kind of numbers like he used to a couple of years ago.
Well, I think he's just another poster child for how you can't just look at 1 year's numbers. He reminds me a little bit of Adam Dunn after the 2011 season when, people stayed away from him in droves. He was the butt of jokes and all. And he came back last year, especially in a format like Scoresheet where there's not a batting average category, where it's more slugging percentage and on-base percentage. Adam Dunn, of course, came back to have a pretty valuable year. And, he was getting drafted insanely low. I think Howard, if he does stay at all healthy, he's probably going to, especially if you can platoon him, if you make sure to have somebody, a right-handed hitting first baseman or even outfielder you can play at first to platoon him with, I think he's got a really good chance to greatly outperform. Is there another sleeper maybe in mind? I know you were down at the labor draft in Arizona this weekend with a couple dozen fantasy experts doing that draft run by USA Today. Anybody you kind of heard scuttlebutt about?
I would say, if we're talking scuttlebutt, I did hear Eric Hosmer. Obviously, a lot of folks like him to rebound. Some folks I talked to, or just in general, kind of throwing it out there that have seen him play this spring on a number of occasions, they say he's looked fantastic. I think that there's a lot of reason to believe in a rebound for him. And I think that all the statistical evidence was there prior to this season, and obviously despite last season's results. But I think to have some at least early results that kind of confirm that is really encouraging. He's kind of ripping the cover off the ball and that kind of thing. He's making contact really frequently, hitting the ball extremely hard, and that's the kind of thing we know he's capable of. So, I think early on, if this continues throughout the spring, at least at a steady rate, I think that there's probably a lot of reason to think that he's a good buy as a rebound candidate.
Huh. Has there been any sightings of that Korean pitcher that the Dodgers signed? I haven't really read anything about him.
I have not talked to anyone who has seen him or anything like that. I would like to see him pitch at least once, but hopefully more than that before the spring lets out. I know that one of my teammates here at KFFL, he's Tim Heaney. He's pretty high on him based on the projection. We equate his numbers when we translate them from Japan, and even when you're hard on numbers like that, I think it says a lot. It's kind of similar to the Yu Darvish case. I don't think his numbers are quite that outstanding, but he was really encouraged by the way the numbers translated, and in general from what he's seen just from watching a little bit of video and stuff on him. So I think that there's a reason for him to be optimistic on him, but as is the case with pretty much anything, I think for most of us, we prefer to see it for ourselves, and so that's somebody I'm going to be interested to follow. Right.
You mentioned Yu Darvish. He's a guy that I'm hoping to get on as many teams as possible this year. I think there's there's generally kind of a learning curve. You come over from Japan, your first time you ever pitch in America, and he more than held his own last year. I'm really thinking this year he's going to be in the Cy Young talk.
Yeah, I think that's a really good possibility. He's a guy that I'm targeting in a sense. Like, I think that that's been the main drawback for me is that a lot of people want to get him on the team, and that's in general. I mean, I guess I've been a couple of folks have kind of at this point probably started to label me a contrarian because I tend to go against the crowd, and so I mean, I think there's probably little chance that I end up with him at least on more than one team. I would like to have him on one team because I do. I mean, I see that potential. So as long as he kind of comes at value to me, I want to take that kind of chance. But it's gotten to the point where I've seen some people kind of reach for him. Even more so than you would, I think, typically expect, because I think that there's an equal chance for risk. But I love the opportunity because, like you said, the adjustments, the learning curve that you would expect for an Asian player, he pretty much dashed that. I think the improvements in his walk rate and strikeout rate in the second half, those are really encouraging. But Paul Sporer, he's a fellow over Baseball Prospectus and a number of other places. He's done some research on. He was actually like he might have been the most squeezed pitcher as far as the strike zone concerned. I didn't even know they kept track of that thing, but I'm not at all shocked that they do. So that's something that could be fairly encouraging for him. You could see a much greater improvement of his walk rate this season. And then on top of that, I think that just in general, I mean, you're talking about the learning curve is not only the pitching and learning how to face the hitters, but it's just a general cultural adjustment, which is really probably the bigger shock to any individual. And I think that the way he handled the transition period was commendable, to say the least. So, I mean, I think that the kind of command that he showed in the second half of the season and as the season wound down in the postseason, I mean, I wrote in his projection file that, to me, he's a Cy Young candidate. He's a very good bet to win one, I think, in the next 3 years, as long as he stays healthy.
Yeah, well, I think I'll be one of those people that probably reaches higher than you, and we'll revisit this come about August or September and see if my reach was a little more. So, folks, if you want to read comment projections, articles, all this stuff that Nick has been talking about, KFFL.com is the place to go. I mean, you guys have quite a bit of interesting writers down there, and your insights are always good. I think that when you prepare for a draft, the more sources of information you can kind of read, plus you're reading about sports, so it's fun. It's not like we're suggesting you study the periodic table or something. You're reading about baseball. You're learning something about fantasy, and you can wow your friends when you pick a guy and everybody goes, oh, yeah, I should have got him. Hey, thanks for being on with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I much appreciated, and appreciate the compliments, even though I may not agree with all of them myself. But, perhaps it's called false modesty, but I appreciate it nonetheless.